Hi everyone, welcome back. This is chapter 6 of Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. Chapter 6 is called Tails You Win. Now, tails is a statistical term in this case. A tail is an event that is rare. So if you see a normal distribution, something like this, these bits at the end, these are the tails. Tails. Bell curve, tails. Now, tails in this term are essentially the things that are long tails, so very, very rare events. But very rare events have very big impacts when it comes to money, when it comes to business, when it comes to investing, and actually when it comes to life. So the message of this chapter really is that it's a few things, a small minority of things that count for the vast majority of results, when those results could be wealth or success. This is the psychology of money, right? But it applies to life generally. So he starts off the chapter by talking about a guy called Heinz Begruen. Now, Begruen fled Nazi Germany in 1936 and apparently showed no real promise. He studied at UCLA, showed no real promise, was never expected to become anything. But he actually ended up being one of the world's most successful art dealers ever. And in I think sometime in the 90s, he sold his collection of Picasso's, Matisse, and really expensive, really famous artists' portfolios to the German government for $100 million. Right, so he did very, very well. But the collection was actually worth about $1 billion. So the German government actually considered it almost a donation. Now, how did one guy know that all these pieces of art he was buying, how did he know that these guys, the Picassos, etc., were going to be the big names? Well, the fact is he didn't. But what he did is he bought as much as he could of everything. So he invested in art like an index fund invests in indices. They just buy, everything, however much they can afford of everything. And then they hold on and they wait and they wait and they wait. And hopefully some of those investments will do well over time. This is exactly what happened with Heinz Begruen. So he bought portfolios. He never bought individual pieces of art. He bought portfolios. So he ended up with a bunch of portfolios. And if any of those portfolios were the work of an artist who became famous, they became massively valuable. So basically all his success was driven by a tiny, tiny minority of what he put his money into. Now, there's a great quote at the end of the chapter, actually, by George Soros, which I'll just say it now because it pretty much drives home the message of the whole chapter. It doesn't matter whether you're right or you're wrong. What matters is how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. You can be wrong half the time and still make an absolute fortune. George Soros, billionaire investor. Everybody knows him as the man, obviously, who broke the pound. Personally, I think that's bullshit. The pound was going down and he figured it would, so he made money on the back of it. So another example that the book gives, that Morgan Housel gives, is Walt Disney. So by 1938, Disney had made about 400 hours of film, and people loved them, but financially they were absolute flops. And his studio he'd already been made bankrupt once. All right, so he was a failure. He was a business failure, and then he made a 98-minute movie out of 400 hours. 98 minutes. That was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1938 earned $8 million in its first 6 months. Totally turned everything around, paid off all of Walt Disney's debts, allowed him to retain his best workers, bought a studio, which is the studio that Disney still works out of today. So after years and years and hundreds of hours and probably millions of dollars of failure, one thing turned everything around for Disney. So that was Disney's tail event. So the message that's coming through on this is, we see successes. Warren Buffett, he's also mentioned in this chapter. Warren Buffett, we see him as an amazing success, which he is, deservedly so, but it's not because he's a genius who always gets things right. There was a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting in which he said that he's owned 400 to 500 stocks in his lifetime, and all his returns have come from about 10 of them. Because he's been doing it for nearly, over 75 years, the ones that were winning, that made a lot of money, he allowed that to compound and compound and compound and compound. So, his returns kind of went ages and ages of flat, and then slowly, and then boom, So that's compounding, which is talked about in one of the previous chapters. That's already been covered on this channel. So this thing with tails, okay, so rare events. One of the examples, it's pervasive. It's in life, it's in business, it's in finance, it's in careers. So most people who are quite good, who are quite smart, they'll go through a few careers before they land in the right industry that they're good at, that they can do well at. All right. You may know somebody who got into the industry that they're still in young and has done extremely well. That would be a very, very, very rare event. But most people, they have a few failures, a few false starts, and then eventually they hit on something good. This is how VC firms work, venture capital firms. So he talks about venture capital firms. If a venture capital firm makes 50 investments, they'll expect half of them to fail, and about 1 in 100, right? So even less than, they'd have to make 100 to get one of these, to deliver more than 20 times the returns. That's what makes them rich and covers all their losses from the other ones. So there was something put out by JP Morgan in there was a report of the Russell 3000 index's performance. So 3,000 companies. And don't forget, to be in the Russell 3000, you actually have to already be successful because you're a public company. So you have to at least achieve that status of being a public company. So you're more successful than most. For every public company, every company that manages to go public, how many hundreds do you think there are that are just mom and pop shops or little one-man bands that never make it off the ground? So being on the Russell 3000 is a tail event anyway. JP Morgan released a report of 30 years in the Russell 3000, and all of the returns, this is interesting, all of the returns were driven by 7% of the companies on there. So 3,000, 7%. 40% of the companies lost over 70% of their value and never recovered, so it pretty much became worthless. Even within companies, you have tail events. So two of the most successful companies out there that everybody knows, Apple and Amazon. All right. Most of Amazon's profits come from Prime and web services, right? But they've had hundreds of products that have been absolutely abysmal failures. Fire Phone was one of them. I mean, this is how much of a failure the Fire Phone is. I've never heard of it, but apparently it was a big launch for Amazon that just completely went down the toilet. And the same thing has happened with Apple. The vast majority of all their profits came from the iPhone. Without the iPhone, Apple would probably be nothing. The iPhone is the tail event. So, this idea that there are geniuses or there are people who are always right, the best people have tons of ideas. Most of them fail, but if they get onto something good, that's the tail event. That's what it's about. So, in life, in finance, in business, don't expect to be successful straight away or on the first hit, because it doesn't happen. It takes persistence, it takes consistency, and I think the best example of that covered in this chapter is probably Warren Buffett, isn't there? There's consistency for you over 70 years of investing, 79 years of investing or whatever. And the people who really succeed, most of the time, they're full of really bad ideas, but they keep going, and then they hit on a really good idea. Obviously, whilst you keep going for your bad ideas, try not to go broke. You can't afford to be wiped out. And hopefully you hit a good idea that really works. So as for the psychology of money, how it would apply to a normal person, what does this mean? I guess you take your chances, but you take measured chances so you never lose everything. And when you get onto something that works, stick with it, whether that's an investment or a business or whatever. Don't get wiped out, keep going. That's chapter 6. Tails, you win. Psychology of money.